Hi everybody, welcome to the show. Hello everyone, welcome back to Raising A to Z, this YouTube channel all about homeschooling. For those of you who don't know, my name is Amanda. I am a certified teacher in Ontario who decided to homeschool her kids a couple years ago. And here on Raising A to Z, we talk all about homeschooling. It is the new year, time for new resolutions and new ideas and trying to tackle new challenges. And for a lot of people, this is a big time when a lot of them transition to homeschooling. We always joke the 3 big times of the year when people transition to homeschooling are at the beginning of the school year, fall, right after summer break, right after Christmas break in the new year, which is now, and then there's another big surge right after spring break. So right now I thought it would be a perfect time to kind of talk about how to get started. So I'm going to be doing a 4-part series, kind of your quick start guide to getting started in homeschooling. So today I'm going to talk about what you need to do before you get started, what you need to think about before you get started. Then I'm going to talk about actually getting started. Then I'm going to talk about finding your groove. And part 4 is going to be like going for the long haul. So you're going to want to stick around for this whole 4-part series. Before we jump into this week's topic, which is the things you need to know before you get started, take a second to go down here and subscribe and click the bell to get notifications. That way you'll know when the next part of the series comes up, which can be really, really helpful if this is for you. If you are a person who is just starting homeschooling, if you're a person who is seriously considering homeschooling, and you really want to do it, you're just not sure where to start, this is a series for you. Let's get started. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about the things that you need to know before you make a full commitment to homeschooling. Because I feel like you need to have a time where you're like considering it, you're thinking about it, you're coming up like, is this something I really want to do? And then you kind of need to pull the trigger and do it. Today we're going to talk about things you need to really think about, really consider before you pull the trigger and actually begin homeschooling. So the first thing you need to really know about homeschooling is not school at home. This is a very difficult concept for a lot of new homeschooling parents to deal with because they have this idea that they're going to have their kids at home, they're going to sit at the table, they're going to do language and math and science and social studies and art and whatever other subjects they have planned, and they're going to work at their desks with, starting at 9, ending at 3, they're going to have 2 little breaks and a lunch, and it is going to go swimmingly. It's probably not, because there's so many things that are different about being at home versus being at school. And if you're trying to make your homeschooling like school in your house, you are going to really struggle and you're going to fail miserably for a couple of reasons. And these are things you need to know. Homeschooling doesn't take as long as public schooling for a variety of reasons. First off, you have a lot less kids. For example, I have 2. Class sizes in Ontario are closer to 30. Much easier to give kids one-on-one because you're giving them one-on-one attention. You're not doing filler work. You're not doing like extra seat work just to get through things. You don't have to like do all of the classroom management pieces that take up a lot of time. So homeschooling takes significantly less time. I always joke that we do in 1 hour what kids in public school are doing in a day and a half. And it's realistic. Like that's realistic. Our 1 hour of homeschooling for my first grader is the equivalent of almost a full day or a day and a half at public school. You also need to know that like even in public schools, they're not teaching every subject every day. That is a misconception a lot of parents have, is that you're doing every subject every day. You're not doing that, and you don't need to do that at home either because you have such condensed, such concentrated time. You don't need to do every subject every day. In fact, you really shouldn't. It's very overwhelming. In public school, there's a lot of grading and paperwork and stuff that needs to be done because a teacher can't sit there and observe every child individually as they complete all the problems or as they do all of the work to see if they understand it. So they have to do a whole bunch of paperwork to grade so that they can actually prove the kids understand what they're doing. When you're educating your own kids at home, they don't necessarily need to do all of that paperwork because you can see that they get it. For example, we're doing time in math, hands on a clock. Alexi understood it like that. Like she was like, I understood this, I get it, boom. She can sit there and do one worksheet with 9 clock faces, putting the right time. And I'm like, okay, you got it. I don't need to do another 13 to prove that you understand this. or to give you more time to practice so that the other kids who don't understand it have the ability to work on it and practice that skill. You get it? We get to just move on to the next lesson. So for a lot of reasons, your home and your homeschooling is not going to be like public school. And that's something that you need to be aware of and that you need to start thinking about. That leads me into my second point, which is homeschooling requires an entire mental shift. It really, really does. Because you need to do so much mental shifting as a parent who is no longer relying on the public school system to understand what learning is. And the funny thing is, as a teacher, I understand what learning is. And I went to teachers college and we talked about what learning is, and we looked at like what authentic learning is and natural learning and how kids are super curious and they want to learn. But when you are in a classroom setting and you have 30 kids and half of them have IEPs and neurodiversities and need extra assistance, your class is underfunded, some of your kids aren't getting nutrition, like there's so many factors that play in that you just don't have the time or the resources to facilitate these more natural learning, more organic learning processes. When you're homeschooling, you can. And that means that your learning and your kids' learning is going to look very different than public schooling. And the thing that's hard about that is it requires a huge mental shift, especially if you A, went to school yourself, as most of us did, and B, that's all you've ever thought of. Things that parents, especially homeschooling parents, need to shift their thinking in are the things that are super ingrained. Things like you need to be sitting at a desk to learn. Things that you need to be in a certain place to learn. There needs to be learning happens at a certain time. Those are things that are ingrained in us because of school. That's not actually the reality of what learning looks like. Learning can happen anywhere. It can happen at any time. It doesn't require workbooks necessarily. It can be a lot of hands-on. It can be very natural moments of curiosity. That's all learning. And because the school system can't facilitate that, we've been told it's not necessarily learning. We need to rethink what learning looks like, and what it's going to look like in our homeschooling is going to be very different from public school. Grades aren't going to necessarily be a huge thing in your homeschooling necessarily because you don't need them. I can see my kid gets it, great. She doesn't get it, okay, we practice a little more. I don't need to sit here and be like, okay, you got 60%, so I'm going to just like give you a C and move on because we just don't have time to keep going over this. That doesn't happen. And so as a homeschooler, for me, what I focus on with my kids is, yes, I want them to understand the basics of how to read and write and do basic math. But for me, the bigger concepts that I'm trying to teach is I'm always looking for, is there growth? Is there improvement on a skill that we're working on? If there is, great. And then I'm always focusing on teaching my kids to learn, like learning how to learn. So how do you look up information? How do you ask a question that's a good question? How do you find resources? How do you look for biases? How are you getting your information? How do you figure out how to do something that you don't know how to do? What skills do you need to do something that you don't know how to do? That's more of the focus that I have in my homeschooling, is learning how to learn. Because once you learn how to learn, you can learn anything. That is not going to show up on a test. So there's a lot of like mental shifts that need to happen if you're going to be homeschooling. A great book that I always recommend is Dumbing Us Down by John Gatto. I will put a link for it below if you're interested. It is a fantastic book talking about how school has different routes and different processes and why we have that. So if you're looking for something that kind of explains that kind of stuff, great book. Like I said, I'll put the link down below for you. Other things you need to know about homeschooling before you start, because if you don't know these things, it's going to stress you out. The third thing you need to know is everybody homeschools differently. And that scares a lot of parents because you go online and you're just like, hey, how do I start homeschooling? What does homeschooling look like? What does your schedule look like? And you go onto Pinterest or Google, or you throw the question up into like a Facebook homeschool group, and you will get 30,000 different answers because every single family does it differently. There's a good reason for that. Every family is different. Every family is unique. Every family has different values. Every family has different strengths and weaknesses. And so every family is going to be unique about it. There are going to be some similarities. For example, Some parents tend to like certain curriculum. Some parents tend to really like certain routines or certain practices. So you might find groups who have similar ideas or philosophies. That's great. There's going to be similarities. You're going to like fall in with people in different groups. You're like, oh yeah, I really like that and it works. But that doesn't mean that your day is going to look exactly like anyone else's, or that your homeschooling schedule is going to look exactly like anyone else's, because your family is unique. You need to figure out what you value. For example, a thing that I don't really care about, penmanship and cursive writing. Couldn't care less. To me, it is not a vital skill. It's a nice thing. I'm sure my kid will teach it at some point just as like a nice thing to do, but it's not like I'm not sitting here looking at my kids going, that A was not formed exactly 100% correctly. We're going to do it again 14 times. That's not a thing that I care about. There are a lot of homeschoolers out there who really do. That's okay. That is just something that they care about because that's a part of their value system. That's fine. But there's going to be differences, and that's okay. And that is a good thing. But you need to know when you go out and looking into the world of how to get started or ideas or philosophies, some philosophies are not going to work for you. Some people's schedules are going to look ridiculously heavy. Some are going to look like they're not doing anything. You will find what works for you, but everyone is different and your schedule is not going to look like anyone else's. Number 4, this is something I wish people told me more honestly. So whenever I talk about before you start homeschooling, you need to know this. Your house is going to be messy. It is going to be so messy. Part of that comes from your kids are just in your house all the time. Yes, we go out. I'm gonna like start with that. We go out a lot. We have a very busy social life, yada, yada, yada. Socialization is not a concern, but as people who are in our house more than regular kids, because for example, a kid who's in public school is gone 7 to 8 hours a day, depending on like busing and all of that, right? They're gone for a good chunk of their day. My kids are in their house for much of that time. So they have more opportunity to play and make a mess. Also, because homeschooling takes less time, like we discussed earlier, they have a lot more free time, which means there's a lot more building and playing and imagination and more opportunities to make a mess. My biggest advice, lower your expectations, because once you add homeschooling to your plate, your house is never going to look as clean as it did once. It is never going to be that magazine perfect look. And so just lowering your expectations and coming up with what you absolutely need to have done on a regular basis is vital. So for example, we have a puppy, so we have a nothing on the floor rule. That is for everyone's sanity and safety. But if you look in my kids' activity homeschool room right now, you would notice that their desk is absolutely covered. Like it's covered in so much stuff. But it is something that I've had to let go, and like we will clear it as we need it, but at least things are off the floor. And that's the lowered expectation that we have. Once a week we'll try to go through and like do a better job, but like for the most part, my house is pretty messy on most days. We're working on it. It's getting better as the kids get older and able to do more on their own and independently, but there is definitely still your house is just messier. It's just more lived in, and that's okay. It's just something you need to be aware of. My next 2 points are kind of similar, but they're a little bit different. Number 5, I always say homeschooling is great, but it's hard. Like I love it. I love homeschooling. Like, don't get me wrong, especially right now in this pandemic. I am so incredibly thankful and blessed that we are homeschooling because I don't have to worry about anything out there. Like, I don't have to worry about buses. I don't have to worry about teaching shifts all the time. I don't have to worry about the kids going from like online to in class to online to in class, long breaks, shorter breaks. Like, I don't have to worry about any of that. We just keep trucking on. Like, it is a great blessing. I love that I get to watch my kids learn. I love that I get to see their light bulb moments. I love that they get to follow their passions and they get to really dive into what they really, really love, which isn't always what would be taught in school or grade appropriate. But they love it. But it's hard sometimes. It's a lot of mental work for me as a parent. It's tiring because you gotta, like I said, we clean more. I'm planning more. I'm getting more resources and trying to keep things organized. Library books. trying to get enough library books, but also make sure they go back on time, making sure there's a great variety of things. Like, it's just a lot more like mental work, as well as there's some more physical work into it. Like I said, gathering books, cleaning up. It's very easy to burn out as a homeschool parent. And that means that you actually have to pay even more attention, I find, to your self-care and making sure you're getting what you need as a parent. And sometimes homeschooling can be very lonely as a parent. My kids have a lot of friends, a lot of homeschooling friends, but sometimes as a parent, you just don't have as many people out there who get what you're going through. Because if you ever complain to anyone or say, oh man, it's just been really tough with school lately, 99% of people out there were like, well, just put them back in school. So it's sometimes it's lonely, sometimes it's hard. Building a support system is really important, but it's great. Like, overall, 90% of the time, I'm like, this is amazing. I'm so happy we're doing it. 10% of the time is like, whew, this is a lot of work. That is my last point. It is work. It is doable work, for sure. Like, you can definitely do the work, but it is work. And it does require, like I said, you being mentally and physically prepared that you're going to have to do some stuff. Homeschooling requires that you have thought, it requires effort, it requires some level of planning. It's not a free-for-all. I see so many unschoolers or people who are like, oh, we're unschooling and my kids just do whatever they want all day. And that's not true unschooling, because even in a much more relaxed situation like unschooling, there's still a lot of effort that parents should be doing. There should be lots of like exposing kids to new ideas, making sure they have lots of resources, changing up the resources on a regular basis, strewing and taking the kids to places they've never been. Like, that's all part of unschooling, but it's not something that's often talked about, and people feel like it's just a free-for-all. So even when, and like, I'm not an unschooler, I'm not, well, not fully. We do a lot of unschooling, but there's a lot of things that people just don't think about and they're not prepared for when it comes to homeschooling. And so I just want you to have some preparation, know what you're getting yourself into a little bit, and be prepared, because like I said, it is great. It is the greatest thing that I think I've ever done for my kids and for my family. The family connections, the learning, the excitement. My kids are thrilled when we pull out workbooks and when we pull out books and novels, when we start doing experiments. Like, they just think it's the greatest thing in the world. I love that for my family. I love that we have that idea that learning just keeps going and it never stops. It's fantastic, and I'm so happy that we do it. You need to be aware of some of the downsides and some of the pitfalls and the things that are hard about homeschooling, and be mentally ready for them and know if you can or can't do them, because homeschooling is not for everyone, and that's okay. But if this is something you really want to do and something you're really excited about and you want to try homeschooling, you're going to want to stick around next week when I show you how to actually get started. Pull the trigger and how to get started. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys like this video, like I said, subscribe and click the bell, and then you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And I put up more ideas, show you what we're doing on a regular basis. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.